Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Last year, the International Organization for Migration estimated that there were over 300 million people living and working outside the country of their birth, more than at any time in human history. Here in Britain, it can sometimes sound as though that entire tide of humanity is surging inexorably to our shores. But we're hardly in the front line. In absolute numbers, the United States, Germany and Saudi Arabia stand above us as destination countries for immigrants, legal and illegal. 1 in 6 of us is foreign-born, but 1 in 3 people living in Australia arrive from somewhere else. And proportionately, the immigrant populations of Germany, Spain and Canada are larger than ours. There may be 50,000 people crossing the Channel this year illegally, way too many. But last year, 130,000 made it across the Mediterranean into Italy and Spain. And that was dwarfed by the 2 million or so apprehended by the Americans at their southern border. None of this is to diminish just how hard the choices facing governments everywhere, irrespective of political outlook, are. But it's worth remembering that we're not unique, and we're far from alone in trying to tackle the challenge of illegal migration. And in politics, sometimes a little perspective helps. Let's see what perspective we can glean from the government. A short time ago, I spoke to the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. Heidi Alexander, this week we learned the economy had shrunk again. The Cabinet met twice this week. Did you come up with any great ideas about how you are going to generate economic growth?
Well, Trevor, I think the first thing to say is whilst from month to month GDP figures might bump around a little bit, of course, we have had the strongest growth of any country in the G7 in the first 3 months of this year. You will be aware, and your viewers may have heard, that since this government came into office, we have secured over £120 billion of inward investment. And so I think our plan to bring stability to the economy, which was central to that budget that the Chancellor Rachel Reeves delivered in October of last year, to make sure that families across the country weren't dealing with the sort of chaos that they saw under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. We've seen those interest rates come down 4 times. I think it is really important that we bring that stability back to the economy, and that's what we have done.
Our viewers are familiar with that list, but over the growth over the last quarter, most people think came courtesy of Donald Trump. A lot of activity pushed forward to avoid tariffs, but the long-term trend is downwards. Is there going to be any change in strategy to kickstart growth? Because it's still flat.
So if you look at what the Chancellor did at the spending review, she made it a priority to invest in things like transport infrastructure, because we know that over the longer term, we have to improve productivity in some of the great cities in this country outside of London, places like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Newcastle. We've secured £15.6 billion worth of investment in transport infrastructure. We've got the reforms to the planning system that we are driving through at pace. Of course, the OBR scored that as having a very significant impact upon future growth. So getting the construction sector thriving is really important.
We're going to come to all of that. The Chancellor's pointed out that the decision recently forced by your backbenchers on welfare reform means that you're going to have to find some new money somehow. Here's what your former leader, Lord Kinnock, said to us last week.
An imposition of 2% on asset values above 10 million, say, which is a very big fortune, the government would be in a position to collect 10 or 11 billion a year.
Did the Cabinet talk about that, wealth tax?
Not directly at the away day. We are very cognizant of the need to address...
When you say not directly, what's directly and indirectly? I mean...
Well, I think
you'd be the only people in the country who weren't talking about it.
I think your viewers would be surprised if we didn't recognise that at the budget, the Chancellor will need to look at the OBR forecast that is given to her and will make decisions in line with the fiscal rules that she has set out. We made a commitment in our manifesto not to be putting up taxes on people on modest incomes, working people. We have stuck to that. We haven't put up income tax. We haven't put up VAT, apart from taking away those VAT tax breaks that people who send their children to private school get. And we obviously haven't put up employees' national insurance.
But we're going to get a budget in a few months' time. We shouldn't be surprised if there are tax rises, should we?
So the Chancellor will set her budget. I'm not going to sit in a TV studio today and speculate on what the contents of that budget might be. We are determined that
I'm just saying tax rises must be on the table.
Well, when it comes to taxation, fairness is going to be our guiding principle. If you look at some of the decisions that we have taken in the last 12 months, for example, making those changes to non-DOMs, asking people who send their children to private school to pay a bit more, increasing the tax paid on private jets. And yes, we took that difficult decision to increase national insurance contributions paid by employers, but we did that. It was necessary to do that.
Forgive me,
in order to get the investment into public
I don't want to spend
services.
too much on time on the past, because you've just said that fairness is a principle. Fair enough. That sounds like code for redistribution, which to other people means there will be some tax rises, particularly on the wealthy. Why not say that?
So I'm not going to set a budget in July when the budget comes in October. You will be aware that the global economy is very volatile at the moment. We have struck those 3 trade deals, which other countries haven't, with the US, with the EU reset, with India. We need to look at what the OBR forecasts are, and the Chancellor will take her decisions in the round. We are clear that we need to be investing in public services. That was a priority of the British people when the general election happened last year. They want to see that investment in the NHS. Of course, we've delivered 4 million more elective appointments.
I'm coming to that. OK, just before we leave the economy, just let me ask you very, very quickly. This weekend, we've learned that your biggest union backer, Unite, is so hostile to much of what you've been doing. It's kicked out Andrew Raynor. I don't want to get into the question of who's a member and not a member. The point is that the response that we heard from Labour source is to dismiss Unite's criticism as silly stunts. Is it reasonable to dismiss criticism in that way?
Well, first things first, Trevor, I think that Angela rescinded her membership of Unite a number of months ago. What I'm focused on and what this government is focused on is delivering improvements for the men and women who get up early in the morning every day to go into work.
But even amongst Labour's own supporters, your backbenchers, the unions... you managed to unite the union for the first time. It's notoriously vociferous, that union. They're all united against you at the moment.
The union members I speak to do recognise what this government has done in the last 12 months, whether that is increasing the national living wage and the national minimum wage, benefiting 3 million people in this country, the lowest paid, to the tune of thousands of pounds every year. We've changed the law when it comes to sick pay. Remember COVID, when people couldn't get sick pay?
So are you saying that the union's unrepresentative?
What I'm saying is that it's a priority of this government to deliver for the working men and people of this country, be that on increases to the minimum wage, the changes we're making to ban exploitative zero-hour contracts, the changes that we're making to ensure that people can access sick pay on day one of being sick. And let's cast our minds back to what happened in COVID and those people that couldn't get their hands on sick pay. I think these are the changes that this Labour government is determined to deliver.
All right, well, let's look forward to the things that you are going to deliver. You're announcing £63 million for electric vehicles infrastructure today. Where are we going with this? Is it your desire to live in a country where everybody has and drives an electric vehicle, or is there still going to be room for hybrid vehicles, petrol and so on? Norway has pretty much 100%. The United States has decided it wants to offer choice. Where are we going to be?
So we'd set out the trajectory a couple of months ago when we made some changes to something called the Zero Emission Vehicles mandate. And unlike the previous Conservative government, who were all over the place on these issues, we have made it clear that we will phase out the sale of petrol and diesel cars that are solely powered by an internal combustion engine, by 2030. That's the sale of new cars. We will allow hybrids to be sold through until 2035. We need to do this in a pragmatic way. We are committed to achieving net zero by 2050, and we know that the emissions that come from road transport are a very significant amount of our domestic emissions. And so we need to make this transition. There's huge economic opportunity in this as well, Trevor, in terms of the jobs of the future. But we need to do it in a way where we take people with us.
So your aim is to get the internal combustion engine off the road and net zero, whatever the cost?
So we believe that over the next 25 years, and remember that the changes that we're bringing in just relate to the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and whether hybrids are going to be allowed to be sold through until 2035, which they will be. 80% of cars that are bought each year are bought on the second-hand market. So petrol and diesel cars are going to be around for a long time, but we have to start making the changes now to clean up the vehicles on our road. But most importantly, to make sure that we've got the really good, high-paid, secure jobs of the future in electric car and vehicle manufacturing.
I noticed that your plans depend on attracting £6 billion worth of private sector investment. Is that the same £6 billion that the charge point operators announced that they were going to spend in 2023 under the Tories, or is it another £6 billion?
So this is a partnership between the public sector and the private sector. This year, we are putting in about £380 million into improving charging infrastructure, and through the spending review, I secured a further £400 million to invest in charging infrastructure, because we know that one of the things that people are concerned about is whether the charge points are going to be
range anxiety
in the
and all of
places
that
they want. But that sits alongside the investment from the private sector. So this is a partnership.
But that was the investment that the Tories boasted that they'd leave it in, isn't it?
There's a huge amount. There is confidence. There is confidence in the private sector about investments. I visited Instavolt's rapid charging hub down in Winchester, which really is a glimpse of the future, Trevor, to be honest. They've got solar panels, they've got battery storage there, they've got a huge number of rapid
You're not
charging.
answering the question I asked. Is it the same £6 billion that the Conservatives said that they had levered out of the private sector, or is it new money?
So the $6 billion is money that the private sector has said that it will be investing over the next few years. Now, obviously, the proof is in the pudding. Everyone can say that the investment is coming. It's when you actually see the new rapid charging hub being built.
Sorry, can I move on to talk about migration, which has been the big story of the week. Keir met President Macron, made this deal with France over illegal small boat crossing. Do we know if that has to be approved by the EU before it can be put into operation? Or can have the French decide they can just get on with it?
So we believe that we've got a robust and workable arrangement with the French. This is a groundbreaking deal, and it's a groundbreaking approach, because previous governments have sought to get an agreement with the French. When they stopped sticking two fingers up to the French, it's got to be said, previous governments, and we realise that the only way you're going to tackle this problem is to do the serious hard yards working with international partners.
But can the French do it irrespective of what Brussels says? Because actually Spain and Italy have already said they don't fancy it much. Can the French do this independently?
So we strongly believe and are confident that we have got a workable deal with France. We've been working very closely with them, for example, on the changes that they are making to the action that they will take in the shallow waters in France to prevent those boats from leaving in the first place. Your viewers may have seen some of the footage of actually French authorities puncturing those dinghies, because if we can stop the dinghies reaching British shores, that's going to be a positive for everyone involved. Not people making perilous crossings across the channel, but also actually not having to then process these individuals that get here. And part of the French agreement is about saying that we will return those people who are landing on our shores, and in exchange for that, we will open up a new safe legal route for people that have family connections here and who are genuinely claiming asylum. And that is part of what this deal is.
But they can refuse some of the people we sent back, can't they? Why would they take back violent offenders and rapists that we send to them?
So there's a lot of operational detail to
that's
work
not
through
that's a matter of
that
principle.
Yvette Cooper and the Prime Minister will be working on. We believe that we've got a robust, workable deal with President Macron. It's a deal that the previous government weren't able to negotiate. And I think this is ultimately the way in which we break the model of these international people smuggling gangs that are operating in multiple jurisdictions across Europe. What you will have seen since this government came to power, Trevor. No, I'd like to make this point. It's an important point. We have to be making arrests. We have to be making prosecutions. We're doing that not just in England and Wales, but in France and Germany. I get all of that.
But there's a matter.
That is why we have to be working with President Macron and our allies in Europe to tackle this problem. We're not going to be able to do it on our own.
But the point is, there is a matter of scale here. I understand it's a pilot scheme. I understand you want to ramp it up and all of that. But you won't know if this works as a deterrent until significant numbers are returned. And 1 in 17, which is what's going to be part of the pilot scheme, doesn't prove anything, does it?
Well, those are your numbers and not ours. We're not putting numbers on it.
No, that's your numbers. You said 50.
No, so we're not putting numbers, a target on the number of people that we want to return. If you want to talk numbers, Trevor, let me tell you this. 12,000 crossings that have been stopped this year.
I know you want to talk numbers, but you want to talk numbers about the past. I want to talk numbers about... I want to talk the numbers about of your scheme.
Don't have any right to be here or... they have been removed. And so you've got to tackle this problem from all angles, Trevor. And that's why we're doing the hard work with our international allies. We're removing more people than the previous government removed, including foreign national offenders.
So is this pilot scheme going to return more than 1 in 17 of those who cross?
Well, once we have got through the pilot phase and we ramp it up, then it is, that's our aspiration. But we've got to learn how this works and take it step by step. It's an important first step. It's an important first step, Trevor,
what is it that you're going to learn?
That the previous government failed to negotiate.
No, you keep wanting to take me back to the past. What is it that you're going to learn from this pilot scheme, then, that you don't already know?
So if there are individuals in France who have family connections to people in the UK and they have a legitimate claim for asylum in Britain, given that they are subject to persecution in their countries from which they originated, we will be opening up a new legal safe route for those individuals to apply. And because it's a reciprocal arrangement, we need to understand how that new process is going to work. We will be detaining individuals at the point at which they hit the British shores. This is a new arrangement. It hasn't been done before. It makes sense to learn how this operates in reality, and then we can ramp it up and increase the scale of it from there.
We'll talk more when we actually see it happening. Can I turn to something which we've been looking at in this programme, and the issue of policing? You, before you represented your current seat, represented a London seat. The Commissioner of the Met told us this week that the racial disparity in homicides in the city are shameful. Do you agree?
I think Mark Rowley raises a very, very serious and important point. And when I was a Member of Parliament in South East London, the hardest moments, not just of my job, but probably some of the hardest moments of my life, were when I met the families of young black boys who had been stabbed to death. And I've got to tell you, Trevor, that the names of Kwame Afuso Asare, Nathaniel Brown and Kevin Sasali will stay with me for the rest of my life. Young black men are disproportionately victims of crime in London, and I think we have to do all that we can to make sure that not only are we effectively policing our streets, and of course the Labour government has committed to 13,000 extra police officers, £200 million this year to get extra PCSOs and police officers onto the streets. But we have also got to address why these young men, and they are predominantly young men, are being drawn into crime in the first place. One of the saddest moments when I was an MP was talking to community leaders, and they said to me that actually you could go into some primary schools and at the age of 5 or 6, you could spot the boys that in 10 years' time would be in a pupil referral unit. So Mark is right to recognise that things like exclusions from school disproportionately affect young black boys as well. And, you know, I think it's, you know, an overriding imperative of this government and indeed the current Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, to address
One
this.
thing that the government could do is at the other end of the process. Rowley says that in one part of the city, court cases that for people that they've arrested and charged are now being scheduled for 2029, which means that suspects won't be tried for 4 years. They may be violent people who allegedly committed a crime against somebody locally. They will be walking the pavement, and their victims, their alleged victims, will be walking those same pavements. Now, isn't the urgent thing to do to get some of those people off the streets? And that depends on finding places for them in jails. Isn't that a priority for the government now?
So the prison population has very high levels of remand prisoners at the moment, and the most serious offenders will be held on remand before their trials are heard. This government has also invested more than the previous government in the number of court sitting days in the Crown Court, where the most serious cases are heard. There's 110,000 sitting days in the Crown Court this year, and that is more than the previous Conservative government had in place. We've also done things to speed up the justice system by extending magistrates' sentencing powers to 12 months from 6 months. We have to tackle these backlogs in the Crown Court because justice delayed is too often justice denied. And so, you know, look, the government is taking swift action to deal with this.
Heidi Alexander, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.